Oh, hi, nice to see you. I was just taking a walk here in Trondheim. Welcome to the presentation of our paper, Error Message Readability and Novice Debugging Performance. I'm Paul Denny from the University of Auckland in Auckland, New Zealand.
And I'm James Prather from Abilene Christian University, Abilene, Texas, United States.
And I'm Brett Becker from University College Dublin in Dublin, Ireland.
Our primary motivation is a challenge that many students face earlier in their education. Here's a C program that a student might be asked to write on day 1 of an introductory programming course. Here's the error message generated by this code. This message doesn't indicate what the problem is, how to go about rectifying it, and even the location of the error is wrong. Such error messages are notoriously difficult and have serious impacts on novice learning. As educators, we pride ourselves on quality feedback, but the tools we frequently use often provide really poor feedback. These messages are also a strange mix of English and a new programming language. We argue that they have poor readability. Prior work in this area includes several years of largely conflicting work in trying to improve or enhance these messages. A 2019 IDICE working group detailed design guidelines for error messages, including increase readability, reduce cognitive load, using a positive tone, and showing solutions or hints. We apply these guidelines to a small set of C messages to come up with new messages that we feel better adhere to these guidelines. We measure the effect of these on C novices who were asked to complete a debugging task seeded with errors that generate these new messages. Our first research question is, are the new error messages more readable using traditional measures of readability than the corresponding original compiler error messages? Our second research question is, do students read error messages, and if so, are the new messages perceived as more useful when debugging code in a new language? Our final research question is, to what extent do the new messages impact debugging performance? So, how did we go about this?
Thank you, Brett. Well, we started by preparing a debugging task. We took a short 20-line C program and injected 4 small errors. The compiler generates a different message for each error, but some of these messages may be tricky for students to understand. We then formulated new messages for each error by following the guidelines that Brett outlined earlier. To measure the effect of these new messages, we set up a randomized, controlled experiment with just over 1,000 students who were learning C. This design allows us to measure the effect of the new messages on debugging performance. When we look at the original and newly formulated messages side by side, our intuition tells us that the new messages should be more useful for students, in part because they are easier to read. However, there are no standard metrics for assessing the readability of programming error messages, but there are well-known measures that can be applied to prose. Using these, we find some objective support for our intuitions. Of course, the main goal of this study was to see if the new messages actually impact student performance on the debugging task. Our tool records every submission that a student makes. We record the time the submission was made, and we classify the submission according to the type of error, and therefore the message that's generated. Looking at the 2 consecutive submissions highlighted in the diagram, we would infer that the student spent 30 seconds reading, interpreting, and responding to the message for error 2. After solving the task, all students were invited to complete a short questionnaire. So, James, what did we find?
Thanks, Paul. We found a really large difference between the groups, both in terms of the number of submissions they made and the time that they spent on the debugging task. As Paul mentioned earlier, we asked the participants if they read the error messages, and if they did, we followed up with a Likert scale about helpfulness and an open-ended question to get more qualitative feedback. And the new messages were overwhelmingly seen as more helpful, as a majority of participants ranked them as helpful. Thinking now about students' debugging performance, the figure here is a histogram of submissions by group. It's pretty clear that the new error messages had a large impact on the effort required by students to complete the debugging task. And you can see that each error is color-coded, and of particular interest, I think, is the very large effect observed for error number 3. It appears that in cases where error localization is inaccurate, cryptic messages prove especially troublesome. Here you can see we've charted the time spent on the debugging task for each group. The old group has a fairly standard distribution of students finishing their work, but the new group has a nice reverse J-shaped distribution with a majority of students finishing in less than 500 seconds. We can now return to our research questions. In answer to research question 1, we found that yes, the new error messages were more readable than the corresponding original messages, according to objective readability metrics. In answer to research question 2, almost all students reported reading the messages, and we found that participants overwhelmingly found the new messages more useful. In answer to research question 3, we saw 2 distinct patterns of debugging emerging, with the new messages decreasing debugging time and effort significantly. Thanks for attending our presentation. It looks like we have a little bit of time for questions. Let's see, are there any questions? Michelle.
Hi, Michelle Craig from the University of Toronto. Thank you for the interesting talk. My question is about whether you think these modified error messages, even if they're more helpful, will cause problems later when students are forced to deal with real error messages.
Thanks for that question, Michelle. That's a really great question. This has been discussed in a few prior studies, and there are a few possible approaches to mitigate against this. For instance, some environments that enhance error messages deliberately present the original and enhanced message together as a scaffold. Either way, we would only envision these enhanced errors being used for the first few weeks or months when students are at the highest risk of being demotivated. Let's see, is there another question around?
Is this thing on? I'd like to thank the authors for that presentation. It was really insightful. My name is Dennis Bouvier from Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and I have a question. Your study focuses on 4 error messages. Do you know how many different error messages are commonly encountered? And how much effort would it be to cover all those common errors? Thank you.
You just caught me before my flight here at Trondheim Airport, Dennis. In most common languages, the 20 most frequent error messages often make up more than 80% of all messages generated by novices. To replicate our efforts for these wouldn't be terribly time-consuming. However, measuring their effects and improving these first attempts would require several qualitative and quantitative studies.
Are there any more questions? Yes, Juho, you have a question.
Hi, Juho Leinonen from the University of Helsinki here. To calculate the readability scores that use the metrics designed for prose, I assume you concatenate the messages together. Do you think this method might amplify some of the problems with the original error messages and create an unfair comparison?
Thank you, Juho. Very insightful and long question. Yes, we did concatenate the messages, as the traditional readability metrics for prose all require passages that are longer than a single message. Currently, there are no readability metrics designed for short messages, not to mention ones that are half English and half code, but we're working on that.
Thanks, Paul. Could I ask another question?
Oh, it looks like we're out of time. If you have any more questions, please feel free to get in contact with us.